Hi everyone, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Megan. Thank you all so much for braving the travel and Friday night stuff to come to this event. It's our first ever Hookers Against Hardship campaign event, so I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And we're here to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So before we started, just to mention, in case you haven't noticed, that we are recording so that we can share with people who weren't able to attend. So it's been a bit of a mad 5 weeks and previous few months of getting everything ready and launching the campaign, and we're really grateful for all of the support that we've received so far. It's amazing to know that so many people support sex workers and want to help raise awareness of the massive problems that the cost of living crisis is creating for sex workers, but also the problems being created by the law and by government policy. So we chose the theme for tonight's event to be poverty as a cause of violence against women, and also a form of violence in itself, because sex workers are acutely aware of the ways that poverty can damage you and the ways that it makes you more vulnerable to harm and exploitation by partners, by clients and by the state. So I'm not going to say any more on that because we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who are each going to talk to you about the different aspects of that theme, including addressing the experiences of women and sex workers who have different marginalised identities as well. So thank you again so much to everyone for coming to speak. We're going to kick off appropriately with a speaker from the English Collective of Prostitutes, since they have kindly allowed us to host this event at their centre. So I shall hand over now to Iris, if we can give her a nice round of applause.
Hello everyone, my name is Iris, and I'm from the English Collective of Prostitutes. We are very glad to be part of this Hookers Against Hardship. For decades, we have been saying that it is poverty that pushes women into prostitution and criminalization that traps us there. We demand money in women's hands so that we can leave prostitution whenever we want. I want to start by saying who sex workers are. We are moms scrapping around for the best deal at the market to make a meal for our children. We are asylum seekers trying to survive on just £41 a week, if we get anything at all. We are the immigrant women left with no recourse to public funds. We are trans women who are kept out of other jobs because of prejudice. We suffer bad working conditions, and it is getting worse because of the cost of living crisis. For those of us who are migrant women and or women of color, we face racism on top of all our other troubles. Whether it is from someone on the bus who refuses to move to let us and our little ones to sit down, or from the men in the bathroom who try to pay us less than the white woman who work alongside. The fact is that if you are poor and you need the job and you have few labor rights, then you are at the mercy of anyone who is ready to take advantage. Whether you are working in a factory, an office, a shop, or a bathroom. Many people are struggling with the cost of living crisis, but for sex workers, we have the added problems that we are criminalized. We are forced to work on our own to avoid arrest. We can't report to the police because they might arrest us instead, while our attackers go free. Women who are just helping others or working together for their safety are convicted of running a bathroom. Women working on the street are pushed out to isolating areas to avoid the police. Together, we are fighting these cases and we win a lot. So we wholeheartedly support the demands of Hookers Against Hardship for an end to benefit sanctions, for benefits to be raised to a living wage, for an end to evictions and for rent control, for an amnesty from arrest for sex workers and for food decriminalization. We demand money from mothers and other people so we can leave sex work if we want. We demand change and an end to criminalization so that women are not punished for refusing poverty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iris. What a fantastic opening. I feel like I'm already roused. Thank you. Great. I'm going to hand over now to Elizabeth from National Ugly Mugs.
Hi everyone, my name's Elizabeth. I'm the Racial Justice for Sex Workers Project Coordinator at National Ugly Mugs. To give a bit of a backstory of NUM, it's a UK-based sex workers charity that fights and advocates to end all forms of violence against sex workers. This is done through a myriad of ways: trauma-informed and sex worker-centred support services through our casework team, mental health services, our research projects informed by the lived experiences of sex workers, and a reporting system where sex workers and organisations can report incidences of harm perpetrated against sex workers. It's vital that when we're talking about the hardships sex workers experience, we centre the voices and experiences of the most marginalised, and how these intersecting facets of identity lead to discrimination and violence at the hands of the state. Migrant trans sex workers of colour are of course particularly vulnerable to anti-trafficking legislation within the UK. Anti-trafficking legislation that is designed to stop the migration of people. Policies like this, which target migrant sex workers, usually end with increased police presence and powers, which lead to the increased deportation and detention of workers. Targeted raids on migrant sex workers have been on the increase since COVID-19, and when the police have the power to define the parameters of sexual exploitation within sex work, this is then used as a means to prosecute trans and migrant women for brothel-keeping offences. Sex workers are left with hefty fines, sanctions, and criminal records that impede their immigration processes and access to employment and housing. Historically, marginalised communities have had to rely on sex work due to the systemic failings of the state and the lack of safety and progression within other workplaces. Now, in 2022, not much has changed on this basis. I'm very aware through the casework that I've done that employers have the ability to refuse employment on a transphobic basis, but as long as this isn't their stated reason, it can be easily passed off for something else. When you think about how this in turn affects racialised, especially black trans sex workers with precarious immigration statuses, it makes sense that migrant trans sex workers of colour end up being involved in sex work as a means of survival. It's also important to talk about no recourse to public funds, which leaves many migrants destitute and in extreme poverty. Insecure immigration status also means that trans migrant workers are increasingly susceptible to workplace exploitation, unfair wages, working conditions, and varying levels of abuse from their employers. With no recourse to public funds specifically, migrants are left with as little as £40.85 to live off a week. The government earlier this year increased the original amount from £39.53, an increase of only 17p a day amidst the worst cost of living crisis we've seen. This leaves individuals with just over £5 to survive off daily, whilst Liz Truss earlier this year was demanding £3,000 of public funds to cover a singular lunch for the Tories.
Shame.
Almost 1,000 more than migrants with no recourse to public funds are expected to live off a year. Benefit sanctions also leave marginalised sex workers in positions where they are forced into survival sex work due to the state pushing individuals into increased poverty. We are living in scary times backed by fascist regimes, with a right-wing government that is pushing for the Nordic model, a model that has been proven to increase violence against sex workers, which will, of course, impact marginalised sex workers the most. The news of Rishi Sunak's plan to revise the 2010 Equality Act, in his words, to make it clear that sex means biological sex rather than gender, would impact the lives of trans individuals on a level that is terrifying. It will remove legal protections for trans people from discrimination within the UK, giving abusive employers and the police more power and justification for violence against trans people. In relation to the project I'm personally coordinating, I'm constantly asking myself, what does it look like to economically thrive within a society and have a high level of autonomy over your own labour? How can we assist in creating community spaces and healing for sex workers? Also, how can we collectively, as a movement, centre the needs of the most marginalised sex workers whilst achieving the demands of this campaign? On a policy level, I want the full decriminalisation of sex work within the UK. Criminalisation and the increased policing of sex workers has been shown time and time again to increase sex workers' vulnerability to violence. The full decriminalisation of sex work has the capacity to protect the rights of sex workers through labour law, safety regulations and workplace health conditions. However, it's important that we're aware that decriminalisation will not fix everything. It's imperative that we continue to fight for the end to oppressive migration and border legislation that forces undocumented migrants to work illegally, as well as an end to all caste-war systems that leave marginalised individuals subject to increased levels of surveillance and violence. We must be united within our approach and care towards the most marginalised within society. Trans migrant sex workers of colour have to be at the forefront of our minds when envisioning the liberation of sex workers. It really is my aim through my work to bring these conversations into spaces so that trans sex workers of colour are centred, not just as an afterthought, that they are able to define what their needs are instead of the state's countless attempts to render them invisible. I want to see abundant, radical community building, long-term sustainable finances and healing for the people that need it the most, and honestly the people that have been at the forefront of so many liberation movements across decades around the world. It's time for people to understand that if you're anti-poverty, you also need to be rallying behind the sex workers movement. If you're anti-racist, you need to be rallying behind the sex workers movement. If you care about trans rights, you need to be rallying behind the sex workers movement. There is no racial justice without the justice of trans migrant sex workers. There is no trans liberation without the liberation of sex workers' rights. There is no sex work liberation without the centering of the most marginalised. The only end to the punitive caste-war state that we live within is an understanding and awareness that all of these struggles are inextricably bound.
That was kind of at times, horrifying about the things that are going so badly in government, but also very positive and hopeful at points. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mary from JCWI now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try and just... Lisa was going to take a couple of photos, but they're just for our use. They're not going to... Nobody's going to be tweeting this out or anything like that.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. Difficult to follow the previous two incredible speakers, but I will do my best. Thank you. Oh, there's a clip, you're right. My name's Mary, I work at the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. We are a national legal charity that supports mainly undocumented people to access stable status, and we campaign for an end to the hostile environment and a new richer status for undocumented people and various other things. But yeah, mainly focusing on the rights of undocumented people. So I'm really happy to be here today to throw our weight behind this campaign and just support the amazing work that's going on. As has previously been detailed, migrant sex workers, particularly undocumented migrant sex workers, face multiple forms of state violence and enforced precarity. Hostile environment policies like NHS charging and data sharing with the Home Office make getting healthcare impossible, and as has been detailed, the NLPF restrictions exclude almost all migrants in the UK from accessing state support. So anyone who is here on a visa and who is here without a visa cannot access any benefits, basically, which leaves people incredibly vulnerable to falling into destitution. And as such, it's a form of state violence that isn't spoken enough about in those terms, I think. And the system makes the work of migrant sex workers doubly criminalised, as sex workers and undocumented people, so for undocumented migrants. This means that people who are in the most precarious situation are left doubly unprotected from all forms of abuse. The hostile environment means that people with precarious immigration status or no status at all are at the mercy of the most abusive and violent bosses. Workers with precarious immigration status are at massively increased risk of exploitation because employers can use their status or lack of it as a tool to trap them in unsafe or underpaid working conditions, and this is something that we see day in, day out in our legal casework. Bosses threaten that they will report workers to immigration enforcement if they speak out or leave, and bosses who collaborate with immigration enforcement to help organise raids in their own workplaces are let off fines for employing people without status, and the Home Office pockets any cash found on site as the proceeds of crime. And this is something that's been going on for years and years, and made worse by the new laws that were brought in 2014 and 2016, which are kind of the core of what we now call the hostile environment, or what the Home Office now calls the compliant environment. And the raids on workplaces and on including brothels are always violent. For those with precarious immigration status, they carry even more risk. And I think other speakers will talk about this more, but the spectre of trafficking and modern slavery are used as a pretext to target some of the most marginalised workers in our society, migrant sex workers. But I think all of us in this room know that people who are caught up in those raids aren't offered support. Instead, all too often, they're locked up in detention centres and removed from the country with no recourse to justice. And it's worth bearing in mind as well that the big changes to asylum law that were brought in earlier this year also bring in huge changes to trafficking legislation that make it even harder for anyone who might be able to access justice through that route to actually get stable status. So that's why JCWI is not only supporting this campaign but calling for sweeping changes to the immigration system. The government needs to decriminalise all forms of work for migrants in the UK. People should never be criminalised for earning a living. And to criminalise people for doing this makes all workers less safe and does nothing but empower exploitative bosses. So all forms of work must be decriminalised, whatever the type of work and whatever the papers someone holds. We're also calling for a firewall between labour inspectors and the Home Office. Firewall is a weird word that I think doesn't really explain what it is, but to stop data sharing between immigration enforcement and labour inspectors. At the moment, if a labour inspection happens in a place of work, they are often accompanied by people from the Home Office. This means that people who have no status or who have concerns about their status are completely unable to report abuse or exploitation at work or unsafe practices because they could end up being detained and removed from the country for speaking up. So we're also calling for a firewall for an end to data sharing between immigration enforcement and labour inspectors. But it's also why we're backing this campaign 100%, because as we all know, only by making all forms of work safe for everyone will we ensure protection for the most marginalised workers in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miriam. That was really very thorough and comprehensive, and we're really pleased to have JCWI support the campaign. It means a lot. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over now to Hodo from Women Against Rape, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Hello? Okay, sorry, I'm really bad on the microphone. Okay. So, hi everyone, my name's Hodo. I'm part of WAR, Women Against Rape. In 2014, my sister sadly took her own life. She had reported a rape to the police, and instead of treating her like a victim, they treated her like a suspect. WAR helped my family through the inquest. They organised a rota of supporters, they got media coverage, so started working for WAR and getting involved with WAR based on what happened to my sister. I'm also a carer for my mum and my two disabled sisters. I love my family, but I should be getting paid for the care work. Yes. We should be getting paid for the care work. WAR campaigns for justice, protection and asylum and compensation for victims of rape and domestic violence. We're independent of state authorities and we don't take any funding from the police or the Home Office. We've supported thousands of women treated appallingly by the police and other authorities. Women who do sex work have always been part of WAR, but many anti-violent organisations have discriminated against sex workers. These groups don't focus on poverty as a cause of violence which drives many women into sex work, and those organisations have been ready to support increased police powers against sex workers. We've won victories including getting rape in marriage recognised as a crime in 1991, and also precedent-setting cases, for example, with the ECP, English Collection of Prostitutes, we worked with 2 sex workers to bring a private prosecution against a serial rapist after the authorities refused to prosecute. He was sent to prison for 11 years. Many women who contact us are women of colour, sex workers, immigrant women and women with mental health problems, women who have experienced trauma, sexism, racism and other forms of discrimination. Some are asylum seekers who have fled rape or torture. Some mothers are fighting against social services removing their children because they suffer violence from the father and are blamed for it, or because they do sex work. The ECP has taught us that most sex workers are mothers working to feed their kids, and sex work is sometimes the way that women get an income of their own to escape violence and keep their children safe, yet women are judged for this. A decade of austerity has wiped out most of the financial independence women, especially single mothers, have had. Things like state benefits like income support. Basically, the escape routes have been destroyed for women to get away from violence. Poverty caused by things like benefit sanctions, the two-child benefit limit they've got for child benefit. Social housing has been slashed, and this has forced women back into the hands of violent men for survival of their kids. Funding for domestic abuse refuges has been cut as more and more women have been needing them. From our work with the ECP, we have had many sex workers prosecuted or harassed by the police instead of the violent men they report. Official figures now show how widespread it is for the police to be violent themselves and to side with the men who are violent. Migrant sex workers can't even report rape because they're likely to be deported, and if migrant women aren't safe, none of us are safe. We support the demands of hookers against hardship, for benefits increase, for an end to arrests, for decriminalisation. We support the campaign for a care income for all women, starting with single mothers. If women got money for the vital caring work we do, we could refuse unwanted sex and have means to escape from violence and exploitation. The pandemic has shown how much society relies on women's caring work, yet women are poorer than ever before, and therefore more women are at risk of rape and domestic violence. As carers, we refuse the poverty imposed on us, and that's what the nurses' strike that they've just announced is about. Give us our economic independence. The money we need and have earned would give all women the choice of how we live and how we care for loved ones. It would give us a fighting chance to escape violent men and create a better life for our kids.
Yeah.
Another very, very inspirational speech. Thank you so much. Amazing. Brilliant. Well, I feel a bit overwhelmed. I'm just trying to absorb everything. Thank you so much, Hodo. That was amazing. And yeah, brilliant sort of calls to action, calls to solidarity. Amazing stuff. Thank you. I'm going to hand over now to V from Swarm, if that's all right.
God, I don't really have much to add. There's just so, like, they said everything better. But hi everyone, I'm V. I'm from Swarm, the sex worker advocacy and resistance movement. Swarm have been around for 13 years advocating for sex worker rights, in particular the full decriminalisation of sex work, as well as working toward improving working conditions for sex workers and their safety of violence. Swarm explicitly identify poverty as both a key driver of sex work as well as a key site of state-sanctioned violence. Swarm are not pro-sex work, nor are we sex industry advocates, but we recognise that for many people, the entrance point into sex work is one of exclusion and desperation, and that many people's experiences in the sex industry include violence and oppression. We know this happens, which is why we campaign for rights, for decriminalisation, and for viable and sustainable financial alternatives away from sex work. Critics of the sex industry deliberately sidestep poverty, austerity, or the wider effects of capitalism in their analysis, as well as outrightly ignoring wider issues of race, migration, and it goes without saying, trans rights, because most critics of the sex industry don't recognise trans people as people. Instead, they focus on the bad men who buy sex rather than the hateful, racist, ableist, and as Elizabeth said, fascist government who force women into poverty. It has been well documented that the best way to empower women to leave the sex industry is to put money without conditions or obligations into their hands, to decriminalise and destigmatise both the sex industry and global migration, as well as offering viable and sustainable economic alternatives. All of this is possible, and we call on the government to act. To those who critique our claims of empowerment, we argue that paying bills, feeding children, and heating a home can be empowering after these small acts of humanity are denied to us through poverty. Poverty is violent, dehumanising, and deliberate. It is a strategy of entrapment and control by a government who don't care and never have. Today, on the International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women, we call for an end of gendered poverty and for an end to the causes of poverty, as well as an end to the criminalisation of the strategies taken to survive it. Poverty is, along with gender inequality, the biggest driver of violence against women. Any call for the elimination of violence without calling for the elimination of poverty is an empty dream. The cost of living crisis is a misnomer. Marginalised people have always struggled. Racialised people have always experienced a crisis of living, as have the disabled, trans, queer and the working poor. The only difference is now that the privileged and middle classes are feeling the pinch. For those on the blunt end, struggle has always existed. The speakers on this panel show and argue how other ways of living are not only possible, but necessary. I would like to quickly end my talk by acknowledging the work of Carol Lee, who passed away on the 16th of November. A huge part of Carol Lee's legacy has been the mobilisation and organisation of sex workers, the communities we build and the ties that bind. Collective action builds strength, resilience and confidence, and we need this now more than ever. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Via. That was brilliant. So we had, unfortunately, a couple of speakers actually, who weren't able to make it due to illness. So I'm just going to read a few things from them. Apart from my phone has closed it. Nikki, do you have a piece of paper?
Maybe go on to the next person. Is that the one?
Not that, that's not this.
Go on to the next one and I'll get it.
Okay, cool. I had all my things open on my phone and unfortunately that's not succeeded. I will in a second. Now, thank you. In that case, I'm going to hand over to Jenny from Sisters Uncut, who's joined us. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really honoured and grateful to be here today, and Sisters Uncut absolutely support the Hookers Against Hardship Coalition. Not very good at public speaking. I don't actually have much to add after everything that all the amazing speakers have said today, but I'll talk a little bit about why Sisters Uncut was created and what sort of work we're doing at the moment. So we were created, or we formed in response to the ongoing austerity and the cuts to domestic violence services that have pushed so many women and survivors into even more dangerous situations. And over the last few years, or actually not a few years, and last year, or the last couple of years, the last year it's just been like one long year. I don't know how long time is. But essentially, after Sarah Everard was murdered, and in order to sort of, I guess, harness the white outrage that was seen as the result of that, we formed a network of cop watch groups in the wake of the Kill the Bill coalition to agitate and organise around trying to get the police bill not passed, which is always never really going to work out, but we were hoping to at least sort of make people a little bit more aware of the effects that have been spoken about today of criminalisation and how those impact the most marginalised, and also how the police simply just do not protect most of us, to be honest, and can't do because they're an oppressive institution. a few of the speakers today have talking about state violence, and that's something that we've always talked about, that poverty is absolutely a form of enforced violence in itself, and a choice of the state to push people into violence, into violence from poverty, and making sure that it is a form of social control, and it makes people more divided. It means people are less like, I mean, in loads of ways it makes people have more solidarity, but it can also makes people more divided, and encourages and increases discrimination. Oh no, my phone's died. Wait. One of the Assist Uncut's campaigns was how can she leave if there's nowhere to go? And that was around the lack of beds for domestic violence survivors, but also the increasing of generic domestic violence services, which meant that black survivors and other survivors of colour, migrant survivors, especially those with no recourse to public funds, found themselves simply with nowhere to go. And it's obvious that this is also another tactic of control. As people have spoken today about the criminalisation of survivors, I think... sorry, I can't think what I'm saying. I think... sorry. But I forgot about seeing people. I don't really honestly, I don't have much to add about about criminalisation, except to say that I hope that we can push together for a more sort of abolitionist outcome, a more abolitionist world in which we can encourage people not to call the police, and make sure that we're able to protect each other and protect those who are more at risk of police violence. And we see, the police are the perpetrators of abuse, really. And we see that in not only the abuse, the domestic and the sexual abuse that police have been known to perpetrate, but also the sexual violence of strip search that we see, and we really want to push for an end to the strip search. I want to end on something positive. I did have a positive end, but I will just finish that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jodie. That was really helpful. And I think we were all big fans of Sisters Uncut, and obviously what happened at the vigil for Sarah Everard was really shocking.
Oh my god, plot twist, I was one of the people that got arrested.
Oh, there you are. Well, we can ask you some questions on Q&A.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think it's important that we support organisations like Sisters Uncut, and that we're really grateful for your support as well.
Oh, 100%.
Actual groups led by women of colour. It's not just kind of nice ladies planning vigils and then backing out of the vigil and leaving everyone to it. Anyway, I've now got the piece of paper, thank you very much, Nikki. So I'm going to be, the microphone, very exciting. So unfortunately Felix from Activism UK wasn't able to make it today, but we were very pleased in the first place that he agreed to speak, and he has sent a speech for us to read, so you're going to have to listen to me more, sorry about that. So he's put at the top, trigger warning for mention of murder, suicide, transphobia and slurs. So, every year on the 20th of November, we mourn the deaths of transgender, non-binary and gender diverse people whose passing was as a result of violence, be that by murder or, less commonly but just as tragic, suicide. This past year saw a total of 327 deaths. A staggering 95% of those who lost their lives globally were women or femmes. 48% of those we lost were sex workers. This is reflected in the statistics year after year, along with the majority of trans women losing their lives also being black, brown or other non-white backgrounds, and a third of those losing their lives in Europe also being migrants. The people most at risk of harm within the transgender community are women, typically women of colour, and often they are sex workers. So Felix has said, I don't want to bog people down with statistics, so I won't fill this speech with numbers. But we know that trans people are far more likely to experience poverty than their cis counterparts, and we know the links between poverty and sex work. It is vital that with every conversation we have about protecting women, that we ensure the presence and recognition of intersectionality, that we acknowledge that every time you add another marginalised group into the mix, you need to confront your own personal biases. In order to advocate for the rights of all women, we have to educate ourselves on the needs of all women. The background of the person writing this speech intersects across a variety of different groups. They are trans, non-binary, femme, bisexual, polyamorous, autistic, disabled, and mentally ill. They are also a sex worker, albeit currently not working due to threats of doxing, revenge porn, and loss of their home. Being trans and being a sex worker often involves either being deceitful in order to ensure you can get work, presenting as a gender you are not, so that you can fit into a wider market, or being open and having to tolerate the fetishizing of your body and identity. You are forced to listen to slurs, use terminology for body parts that make you sick to your stomach because you know it's what the punter wants. And at the end of the day, there's the constant thought in the back of your head that if someday someone turns violent against you to an extreme degree, there's a precedent set that they can say, well, I didn't know they were a tranny, and people will nod solemnly and say, ah, well then, this violence was of course completely justified. There are individuals and groups that would have you think that there is a divide between trans women and cis women, that our differences mean that we cannot fight for common goals, when this could not be further from the truth. We know that the vast majority of cis women are our biggest advocates. Cis women stand by us and mourn our losses on Transgender Day of Remembrance, and the trans community stands with you today on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Thank you, Felix, from the recording. Brilliant. Okay, I'm now going to move on to Miriam from Freedom United.
Hi everyone, I feel very honoured to be here this evening with such an exceptional group of activists, so thank you so much for the organisers for having me. My name is Miriam Karmali and I am representing Freedom United, and we are a global anti-trafficking campaigning organisation, and we employ a human rights-based approach across all of our work. As the Hookers Against Hardship campaign makes abundantly clear, the cost of living crisis is having a devastating effect on sex workers and the most systematically marginalised through political choices. The crisis will see more women pushed into sex work and more sex workers pushed into the violence of poverty. Combined with criminalisation, this makes sex workers even more vulnerable to violence, exploitation, and in extreme cases, trafficking and forced labour. As other speakers have already put it so eloquently, under criminalisation models, workers are made to be unsafe. They are less able to safely and effectively negotiate for better working conditions, and it's in this environment where violence and exploitation can thrive, because abusers can exploit the fact that sex workers are unable to seek support from the law without risking their own criminalisation. And as other speakers have also put, violence also occurs at the hands of the state, so police raids under the guise of anti-trafficking are always violent and put sex workers and even trafficking survivors who are caught up in them at risk of detention, deportation. So we're seeing at this sort of extreme end of poor working conditions, disempowerment of workers, and poverty. This is where forced labour and human trafficking thrives. We know through denying people their rights under a carceral framework will do absolutely nothing to prevent human trafficking, and will in fact only punish survivors and sex workers. And we see this through, acquiring criminal records, which automatically cuts off alternative employment opportunities for those who would look to exit the sex trade should they choose to. And again for migrant sex workers who may be undocumented, resulting in deportation. We must see this government implement genuine anti-trafficking prevention strategies which take aim at the root of the structural drivers of trafficking, which include the destigmatisation and decriminalisation of sex work, ensuring safe migration, routes out of poverty, access to safe, affordable, decent housing for all, and routes to regularisation for everyone with insecure immigration status. That's why Freedom United supports the Hookers Against Hardship campaign. And we support the full decriminalisation of sex work because this is an absolutely vital component to building people's resilience to all types of exploitation, including trafficking and forced labour, and to ensure trafficking survivors are supported and able to seek support from authorities without risking arrest, detention, deportation and destitution. So, as we all know, this winter is going to be incredibly harsh and difficult for many, and we stand in full solidarity with sex workers and all workers demanding their rights to live in dignity.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Again, we're really, really pleased to have Freedom United support, and we really appreciate it, especially when it's, as I'm sure you know, the anti-trafficking sector can be a very difficult sector for us to make headway in and to get support from, even when some organisations have told us kind of privately that they are supportive of decrim, but then they're not able, for various reasons, to come out and say it publicly. So we've got ongoing work going on to try and persuade them to change their minds. But yeah, that's why it's so important to have public support from organisations like Freedom United. So I've got one final short statement, so it is going to be me again, since I forgot to tell anyone else to read this. Thank you very much. So this statement has been sent to us by Chiara Capraro from Amnesty International UK, who also unfortunately wasn't able to make it. But thank you very much, Chiara, for sending this in. So she has said, Amnesty International has always been clear that poverty is one of the root causes of sex work. And the cost of living crisis, on top of 12 years of austerity, means that sex workers continue to pay the highest price. The government's response to the poverty and violence the sex workers face is criminalisation. Sex workers tell us that criminalisation puts them in danger and it prevents them from taking up different jobs and being able to leave sex work. Sex workers tell us so, but they're not listened to. In 2019, the government was forced to acknowledge that waiting times and benefit sanctions have pushed women into sex work or to go back to sex work to make ends meet, but nothing has changed. Despite the government's legal duty to realise the right to an adequate standard of living, to work, to health, to housing, and to prevent and combat violence against women, we see the same failed responses recycled over and over again. The full decriminalisation of sex work is a crucial step to guarantee the safety and well-being of sex workers, and it's urgently needed. However, access to social and economic rights is as important to end discrimination and violence. Amnesty International continues to stand in solidarity with sex workers to end violence and human rights violations.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. That is the end of our various speakers and speeches and written in things. It's been amazing to listen to all of you. I feel like I've already learnt loads, and I hope that everyone else has enjoyed it as well. We are going to have a short sort of Q&A/discussion section, so start to heave your questions if you have questions, guys. I'm just going to say a few things to kind of wrap up. I think one of the key themes has been that government laws and policies have been getting worse, which I agree. There have been a number of new pieces of legislation that have unfortunately passed that are extremely concerning for our right to protest, for our, numerous different things. It's hard to list them all really, isn't it? It's a bit depressing. And kind of in that environment, it's very easy to feel very downhearted and kind of like it's futile and what can we really do. So I think that's kind of why we were really keen to start this campaign at this time. We're still sort of living in a pandemic. I know everyone likes to talk about it being the pandemic's finished, but the pandemic hasn't finished. And we're now also in a cost of living crisis, we're in a recession, we're being faced with a government with increasingly extremely right-wing policies and laws that it's passing. So I think it's possibly the most important time that we've had to bring organisations together, whether it's a coalition of sex workers' rights organisations, or also being joined by our colleagues from various other groups as well, and to come together in solidarity to identify what really are the causes of the problems that we face. And the fact that poverty is really one of the causes of violence against women, and as V very aptly pointed out, that poverty is enabled and created by the government. It's not some sort of inevitable fact of nature that just happens. So I think that's important to note. I think there have been some sort of potentially hopeful changes over the last couple of years. So as Jenny mentioned, the Kill the Bill protests and various kind of Black Lives Matter protests that have happened that have had really big engagement. Ultimately, I think things always kind of go up and down in terms of engagement, but I'm really hopeful about the fact that questions about not just police conduct but the role of the police, I feel, have come higher up on the news agenda and also in kind of social justice conversations as well. And I definitely agree with what some of our speakers have said. I think sex worker organisations are really clear that the ultimate function of the police is not to protect marginalised groups. They don't keep us safe, they don't protect us, and we can't rely on them for that or expect them to do that, and there can be no solutions to poverty or to violence against women or to violence against sex workers that rely on the police to keep us safe. I also really wanted to come back basically to Elizabeth's wonderful point that we are fighting for decrim, but it actually won't fix everything. And that's definitely something I'm sure we all agree with. And we need to work to end all carceral systems and oppressive systems, and at the same time do the really positive work of build a community and doing mutual aid and kind of that's the point really, isn't it, of the slogan that people say, the police don't keep us safe, we keep us safe. That's why we need to come together and look after each other. Just to go on a random tangent, I listened to a podcast episode recently that was talking about labour organising of migrant women workers who worked in laundries in the US. And the woman who'd written a book about it, because she'd been involved in supporting their work, talked about the fact that through this work of building a union and of coming together, these women that worked at the laundries, it wasn't just that they were kind of fighting for better labour rights, but they also built community and solidarity around this, so that when some of the women were experiencing domestic violence, they had like a phone tree where everyone in the group was texted and they all came to her house to protect her. And I think that's the kind of really amazing example that we can be building and that all of our different groups are hopefully working towards as well. Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Go ahead with your questions, guys. Anyone? Any questions? You can have comments as well. We don't ban comments.
I guess I would just be interested to know, because there's so many amazing groups here, I would just be interested to know what these groups are working on at the minute, and like, yeah, I'd really want to know that from everyone here, what everyone's working on.
I do think, Jenny, you were going to maybe talk a bit about sisters.
Was I?
You don't have to, I know if you get nervous, but you don't have to.
You don't have to, but...
Well, no, it's Megan, as you were just saying about building alternatives to a carceral state. I was just now before I was coming reading, is a US-based publication, but building on a lot of the work that the Bay Area Transformative Justice, I can't remember the last word in that acronym, but something collective probably, around how to respond to intimate partner violence in the community, and also to think about how our communities are like often encouraged to be fractured by legislation and by external factors and by poverty, of course, and how we can kind of push back against that. But one thing I've also been thinking about is just about, I think where it's so invaluable to have coalitions and to like make sure that we're talking to each other, is because it can get quite easy to get sort of focused on your own thing, especially with external pressures. And I think especially as there's less access to resources, some of those resources are there, but the people on the front lines aren't going to have the extra capacity to know about them unless that capacity is picked up. Like with funding and stuff like that, there are still funds, even if there's less, but maybe people don't know about them because, yeah, what I said.
I guess, so I'm working on a project at NUM called Racial Justice for Sex Workers. The central aims around that are looking at the barriers in public services that racialised sex workers face. So looking specifically around policing, housing, higher education, and just racial discrimination within the UK. A lot of the project is based around having in-depth conversations with sex workers of colour around their needs. and also speaking with other organisations that are doing radical work within healthcare, that are also abolitionist groups, and pushing those messages and aligning that with the needs of sex workers of colour. At the same time, also creating community spaces for sex workers of colour to be able to come together, because it's been a long time of sex workers of colour feeling very isolated, feeling like on the brink of the sex worker movement, and just needing to be together, to come together. And there is such an amazing skill set within sex workers of colour to be able to come together and define their own healing. So the project that I'm doing at the moment is centred around looking at the barriers that are within these certain public sectors. How can we kind of reform or look at changes within that, led by the needs of sex workers of colour, and also creating community spaces for them to come together, and also hopefully putting a reporting form together that sex workers can report instances of harm that are perpetrated by those in positions of power. So that's currently what I'm doing.
So mine's kind of gone blank, but we've been doing a lot of campaigning against the police. At the minute the Met are in special measures, so we're trying to get articles about that, about the strip searching, so child Q. We've done a lot of work on that. We're also working with the ECP on things like, I think in the borough of Newham, they're setting up protection orders against sex workers. So we're working to get that in the media, so that people know what's happening. We also do a lot of work with self-help. People come to us if they've been raped, sexually assaulted, sex workers, migrant workers, any woman, and we try and assist them with maybe getting a lawyer, or signposting them to somebody trying to help them. And also we're also working with women of colour, with the deportations, what's going on in Kent at the moment, those kind of things. Okay, sorry.
That's a lot.
Family court.
The family court, sorry. So this is really, really important. So every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of every month, we picket outside the family court in Holborn. The family court is a secret court. Nobody knows what goes on there. We're supporting mothers, so sex workers that are mothers, disabled mothers, single mothers, and trying to get those courts opened, and trying to tell people what's going on in those courts, how mothers are being discriminated against. It's the first Wednesday of every month. If anyone wants to come, 2:30 to 1:30. 12:30 to 1:30.
Well, these questions I will leave it to Vicky from
answer. Sorry if I jump up. Thanks, Hodo, for mentioning the Newham Public Space Protection Order, because I wanted to say about that. It basically means that an area of Newham, they impose an order which bans the selling and buying of sex. The justification is that they're cracking down on clients, but in fact it's sex workers that get arrested first and most. And what happens is they can give you literally an on-the-spot fine of £100, and then if you are caught in the area again, you get taken to court and it's £1,000 fine, which is really horrendous. And we've been working with some local people who are actually going to do an open letter, but in the meantime we did an action alert asking people to write to the leader of the council. They did a sham consultation that was so bad they actually got one of the questions wrong, which meant that you couldn't actually oppose the public space protection order. You could only agree with it. But really scandalous. And we also got some academics involved who did a big project in East London, and it was really shocking what they found, because they found that 42% of street workers had actually experienced violence from the police. And this public space protection order would give the police massive discretionary powers, but it's also council officers and other people that get given the power to give you an on-the-spot fine of £100. So it's very scary. It's all the information's on our website and obviously on our social media channels, and we're just asking people at the moment to write to the leader, because the leader typically is pushing for it because they think that is going to be the way to promote their own career, to kind of get ahead by being seen to crack down on sex workers. And just to confirm, just to say what Hodo was saying also, we also as the ECP are involved a lot in the issue of sex working mums having their kids taken away. And I just want to say, I think it's really, when I was sitting here listening to the panel, I think we also have to register how far we've come. It's like you've got an anti-trafficking organisation which is for decriminalisation, a migrant organisation, 2 anti-violence organisations. National Ugly Mugs is so much more of a useful organisation to sex workers now than it was when it was first set up. So things have really, really moved ahead. And with the sex working mums issue, we've really been strengthened as a sex worker group, being able to work with Support Not Separation, which is a coalition based at the centre, been fighting for years to stop the separation of kids. And it's really helpful to, as a sex worker organisation, often you're really disparaged and dismissed, and it's really helpful to be able to call on and work closely with other women's organisations in that way. Same with Women Against Rape. If we're fighting to help somebody get justice after they've been attacked, we always do it with Women Against Rape, and sometimes we sort of say, like, you write the letter, because we know that they're going to listen to you when they won't listen to us. And so that kind of, we work with Global Women Against Deportations, because a lot of the migrant women in our group have been threatened with deportation, especially after Brexit, when the police racism and illegality got so bad and people were literally just being picked up off the street and deported. And so being able to call on, other women's organisations has been massively, massively helpful to us. And long may it continue until we all win.
Bill, do we have any audience questions? No question is too small. Oh yes, hello at the back there.
What can local authorities be doing to support, or councillors?
What can local authorities or councillors be doing?
Who would like to answer that question? More?
Are you a local authority councillor? Do you have any ideas yourself? Do you?
Showing intel?
Yeah. Do you want to say anything?
Just like not increasing police powers, maybe not being like prosecuting sex workers, instead of maybe we need them to be talking about poverty and what sex workers are going through, instead of like what they're doing in Newham, being for more police powers.
That's right.
I think simply don't make it worse.
Don't make it worse. Exactly. Yeah, don't make it worse. Yeah, make it worse.
Thanks. I was just going to add as well, I don't really know what a counsellor is or what they do, but I know that Swarm have a lot of so Megan, you mentioned that a lot of anti-trafficking organisations, a lot of individual members of staff are on board with decrim but can't institutionally say it. And I know at Swarm, we know, and it will be the same at ECP, we know how many MPs are on board with decrim but kind of won't say it. And it takes real guts for some MPs, what's her name, who just came out in support of Hookers Against Hardship.
Nadia.
We know how amazing it is when they do come out and support us, because actually I think most of the population are also, I would say, probably on board with decrim as well. I just think not feeling so institutionally bound to support the Nordic model would be the best start. And even though I don't really know what a counsellor is, I think it's an issue of politics.
Just to add to that, really echo that, and on the question of what local councillors can do from a migrant rights perspective to support sex workers and to support the call for decriminalisation, there is a huge amount that local councillors can do, even kind of without outside of the bounds of Westminster politics, and it's actually, that's where a lot of the power does lie. Local councillors can be calling on their councils to institute firewalls between local authority labour inspectors and immigration enforcement.
What is a firewall?
So yes, so a firewall is
I don't know, I assumed everyone else knew.
No one knows, and I say it all the time. I need to stop saying it. It's just protection that stops one authority from sharing data with another authority. So at the moment, for example, if a survivor of domestic abuse goes to the police for support, they can be handed over to the Home Office for immigration enforcement because their own status is under question. A firewall would stop that from happening. The same with labour inspectors. So a firewall would stop labour inspectors from going into a workplace and being able to hand people over to the Home Office because they suspect that their papers aren't in order. That's something that we've all kind of spoken a lot about. Migrant sex workers being some of the most marginalised and at-risk workers in our society, and that is one thing that would put in place at least some protections for those workers. And local councillors can do a lot to support calls for NRPF to be scrapped, so that all workers can access support when they need it.
Recourse to public
funds. Yes.
Don't talk in acronyms.
And in general, just being more vocal. JCWI is working with a network of local councillors, so if anyone is interested in knowing more, we'd be really happy to work with anyone to support kind of more cooperation between local councillors across the country on migrants' rights issues and sex workers' rights issues.
Thank you. Yes, there we go. Question.
I just want to know about the protests outside the family court. What exactly are you protesting against, and what are you trying to?
Okay, so is this okay? I don't need to use this anymore. Okay, so it's basically we're trying to get children back to their mothers. Those courts, a lot of the times, they would use a mother reports domestic violence. That is ignored, and the father is allowed to see the kid anyway. They'll report a rape, and the father is still allowed some time with the kid. Same thing with they'll use, a lot of those family court judges would use the fact that the mother is poor, the mother is disabled, the mother is engaging in sex work, to take away that kid and say the mother is unfit. So we're fighting for the kids to go back to the mother, for a care income for those mothers, because most of those mothers, their kids are taken away because of poverty, and a lot of people don't know that. The family court is a secret court, so one of the chants we do is open the courts, because it's such a secretive court, and they use the excuse that it's harmful for the children, for people to know what's going on. But really, it's because they don't want to be exposed about how much terrible stuff happening in there. So basically, the main aims are trying to get the kids back to the mothers, trying to get help for the mothers, like in terms of benefits, trying to get more legal support, because a lot of mothers can't get legal aid, and to prosecute the fathers that are engaging in domestic violence, raping the mothers. So those are the main aims.
What would opening the court look like?
Opening the courts would look like making it public, so knowing what goes on inside those courts. So
would you have the names of
names and learning about how the judges make those decisions.
Social workers.
Yes, how the social workers are so quick to take the kids away from the mothers, for, like I said, mainly for poverty, because the mothers can't afford to, maybe feed their kids, but it's not because they don't want to feed their kids, because they don't have any money, but they'll use that as, well, she's an unfit mother, well, she's engaging in sex work, she's an unfit mother, we've got to give it to the dad, and that dad maybe has engaged in domestic violence, has attacked the mother, has maybe raped the mother, but there's this thing called parental alienation that's really, really big in the family court, where they say the right of the father, the child has a right to see their father, despite the father being a domestic abuser, despite the father being a rapist. A judge will say in that court, well, but still the father has a right. He can just go on a course. And a lot of people don't know that's going on, and that's why we're so insistent on those courts being open, but there's a lot of pushback from it by those higher up. So that's what it basically is. I hope I explained it. But I can give you a link to explain it better.
Megan, can I just add something super quickly to that as well? And this is kind of linked to the fact that women who sex work are often at higher risk of losing their children permanently. But I do want to highlight that women that have had their children forcibly removed from their care have the highest death rate of any comparable age group. They're more likely to stay in violent relationships, they're more likely to be homeless, they're more likely to die of drug-related deaths. I can't think of the word, what's the word? Fatality rate. They've got the highest fatality rate of any comparable group of women in the same age, women that have had, and this is I think they're 36 times more likely to die of a drug overdose, or the numbers are just, it's genocide, that's what it is. And it's again, it comes into this, it's a deliberate governmental strategy. But yeah, so it's just to highlight the importance, it's so important when we talk about sex working mothers who are at risk of losing their children, it's like a death machine in a way. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
The ladies at the back.
I was just going to add, I don't know if that's what you were going to say, Lisa. The other thing is, we are calling for the courts to be open because so much of this is going on, behind closed doors. But of course, there are ways to be able to protect children's identity and and it's a bit like Women Against Rape have often said, that's what can happen, to save the identity of women who are survivors of domestic, of violence and rape.
What I was going to say is, it's like you would. Sorry, I'm from Women Against Rape. It's like it would be similar to the criminal court, and the difference at the moment is that if you're a mother in a family court, you're not allowed to even speak to your own family about what's happening in that case. So it means you can't get any help, you can't get any support, you can't take anyone in with you. You can't, you're allowed to talk to a lawyer, but that's it, and most women can't afford lawyers. And what's happened over the years, in recent years, is that there's a very powerful misogynist men's lobby, which is international, which is pressing for the right to basically rape women and children. It's that bold. And these family courts are upholding men's right over what even the children want. Because when the children say they don't want to see their dad because they're scared of them, even that's put down to what they call parental alienation. And they do a psychological analysis of the person and make them go on a course to acknowledge that the kid has the right to see the dad and the woman has to confess. It's just awful. It's just really, really pre-Victorian torture. So that's why we're against it.
Can I tell a really good story though?
I'm sorry, I have to tell a really, really good story. One of the women in our group is a sex working mum. She was in a really, really violent relationship for quite a long time. She escaped from that, and then the man came after her to try and take her child off of her. She went to court. They told her that she wasn't allowed to speak about it, but it was really going badly. It was really going against her. There was a lot of sexism and a lot of prejudice, and all the whole story of her sex work had come out, so they were really using that against her. And at some point she turned to the judge and she said, if you rule that my work as a dominatrix is more of a threat to my child than this violent man, I will take your name and I will tell everyone. I will put it through the mud. I will tell everyone. He did her for contempt. She paid the fine because she's a hooker and she could afford it. She had £260 and she went public with her case and she won.
Wow. I'd like to hear more from all of you about how this kind of coalition came together
and kind of how you all sort of met and just kind of came together as a group, I suppose.
Guess I shall answer that question. Hello, there we go. So I'm one of the coordinators of Decrim Now, which is the national campaign for the decriminalisation of sex work. I also did the voiceovers of the campaign videos, and I had to re-record me saying decriminalisation, like it's very hard to say it at a normal speed. Anyway, that's why we just call it Decrim. That's why it's Decrim. I was like, I just say Decrim. It was a real problem for me. Yes, so I've been a member of Swarm for a couple of years. So and a lot of our organisations are very much interrelated, and we work together a lot anyway. But I really felt like we definitely have strength in numbers, and it would be a much more powerful campaign if we all came together as kind of really all of the major sex worker-led organisations in the UK, and yeah, like throw our collective voice together, because the problem is that we're a very marginalised group of people and a sector, and it's very easy for people to ignore us. And the things that we ask for, the things we want, even though, as we've highlighted, the campaign's demands are really sort of anti-poverty measures that will protect lots and lots of people, but we're highlighting them because of sex workers' particular experiences. And it's not always easy to get, for example, kind of big unions or big national campaigns to acknowledge you and to work with you. So that's why I think we have to really come together as grassroots campaigns, and kind of real campaigning organisations like JCWI and Freedom United that do support marginalised groups, and bring that collective voice and collective weight to try and get further. And I think that has been successful so far, and we will obviously keep going. We've got all the videos out now, and we've got more things coming. In terms of press, which is really exciting. But yeah, I keep telling myself you don't just sort of do one campaign and you're like, oh, we've done it now, we've fixed it. So it's an ongoing battle, and there's all of our organisations kind of do slightly different work. So Swarm does loads more community building work, Decrim Now is more focused on campaigning, ECP does loads of really like grassroots frontline work with women who are facing difficulties, or street-based sex workers, or women facing kind of immigration issues, and yeah, so and then there's the union as well. Unfortunately, no one from the union was able to come to speak tonight, but the union is doing amazing, like pioneering, groundbreaking work as well to defend sex workers as workers, and to organise workers in strip clubs, and to fight against local authorities which are trying to shut down people's workplaces during a cost of living crisis, which is really very mad. And they have been fairly successful so far. So the Bristol strip club ban got overturned, and they're fighting in Edinburgh now as well to have a judicial review against the council's decision to shut down all of the strip clubs. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to turn the question back and say, what can all of you do to support us? So you may have noticed from the campaign's social media, we have a GoFundMe, and all of that money will be used to distribute straight to sex workers who are in crisis. So I would really encourage you, if you're, obviously we know that it's a very difficult time financially, since that's the point of the campaign. So we understand that lots of people won't be able to donate, but if you can share it with your friends and family who might be able to, that's really, really helpful for us to enable our organisations to keep financially supporting sex workers who are struggling. We also have an email tool where you can email your MP. So as Via's mentioned with it, there are a small number of MPs who will admit to us that they do support Decrim but don't really want to talk about it publicly. So one of the things that we can do about that is get constituents to say, this is actually a real issue in our area, this is an issue that I care about, and I demand that you have a position on it, and that you respond, and that you support the campaign. So that's really helpful for us, for people to email their MPs to kind of raise their awareness as well, and demonstrate the support that we do have. We've also launched a petition, which is to lobby the government about our call to decriminalise sex work. So it kind of lays out some of the many things that everyone has discussed here about the way that criminalisation makes women face more danger and harm and more violence, and doesn't help anyone really. So we're calling for them to get rid of criminalisation so that women can work together in safety. And it feels like a really basic request, really. We'd just like to be able to work together in safety, and also have proper anti-poverty measures. And I often think it's great hearing from organisations like what Elizabeth is doing at NUM and Sisters Uncut as well, because I think a lot of this work is about imagining the ways that the world could be different, and then both demanding that it should be that way and making it that way ourselves. So that's how I kind of feel is it's difficult when you're doing a campaign where you are asking the government to do things, and realistically you know that they might not do a lot of those things, but you still have to, they're the government, their role is supposed to be in theory to sort of protect us.
They work for us.
Yeah, the MPs work for us. So that's why I kind of wanted to make sure that we were making demands of the government, because if you don't ask them to do anything, you're kind of letting them off the hook. And as we mentioned, a lot of like poverty and the existence of billionaires while people are starving is a policy choice. It's a choice that the government has made. This recent budget, where we're going to have everyone's taxes are going up, or at least those of us who are sort of working on lower incomes, our taxes are going up. But how much are wealthy people being taxed? Not enough. Obviously, it's about the distribution. There's plenty of money to go around. It's the people that have it that's the problem. So yeah, I think that's something that we're trying to make obvious. And then, yeah, just the government's policy choices to continue operating benefit sanctions at a time of a cost of living crisis is completely unacceptable. I mean, benefits are already not enough to live on. They're not increasing them in line with inflation until April next year, despite the immense costs that people are facing now. And even then, they weren't enough to live on in the first place. They're not going up enough. It's not enough. And they're still sanctioning people for, frankly, sometimes ridiculous reasons. It's just not acceptable. Yeah, that was a really long, rambling answer to your question about how we all came together. So many of these organisations we've worked with, so previously Decrim Now put together an open letter to MPs to ask them not to support the Nordic model, and we had organisations like Freedom United and JCWI that very kindly signed that open letter and helped us to kind of promote it. So we're, I think, definitely more and more trying to build networks outside of some of the sectors where we already have good support and trying to get support in a lot of other areas. So if you do happen to work in a violence against women and girls organisation, please come and talk to me about getting us to come and speak at your organisation about sex workers' experiences. Or yeah, loads of other sectors where we're always looking to make inroads into and to build our support. And understanding, I think, is actually the key issue, because I think a lot of people don't know very much about sex workers' experiences. They don't really understand what the challenges are or the particular difficulties. And I think getting past that first barrier is kind of the main hurdle as well. There's Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just because today is the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. I thought it might be useful to just mention in relation to what the ECP does. They work closely with the Black Coalition Against Serial Murders in the US, where a serial murderer targeted communities of color. He killed over 100 women, and many of the women, they were all from poor communities, and many had, for example, drug addiction or were sex workers, and the police would actually write on the paper, NHI, no human involved. And it was absolutely horrendous. And then this went on for a couple of decades, and it was the ECP worked closely with the Black Coalition Against Serial Murders. And the man, he was fine. Well, they caught a man who they said did it, and he was put away. And they've made a film about it, The Grim Sleeper, where you can see, you know, some of the work that was done to bring the man to justice. And I think it's just worth, you know, we're fighting again, you know, for this horrific cost of living, but the international issue of women's poverty is like crucial to everything. And you know, as Hodo was saying, that something like care income, money in women's hand would make such a difference. And then I just wanted to mention in Haiti, today thousands of Haitian women took to the streets against. There's been a whole set of violence by the government. The government has been fueling gangsters and paramilitaries to keep down working class communities and also to attack rural areas. So the women they've been on the streets for 4 years, but today women across sectors, peasant women, journalists, feminists, grassroots women, activists all took to the streets to call the government to account for the violence that's being done. And we're just putting out a mailing about it, and we'll put it up on social media tonight, but we hope you could share that in your networks. It'd be really important to stand with the women in Haiti, because they were the first to end slavery, so they're a very important community for us. But often they get left out and are just dismissed as, oh, this poor country and these poor women. But they give us a lot of leadership. So I just thought I would mention that in the context of our fight against violence and for justice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all on the panel. It was a fantastic panel and so informative. So thank you. Thank you for organizing.
I am going to, at risk of, rather than sort of trapping you all here forever while we just keep talking about this, I am going to draw things to a close. But thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming and braving transport difficulties and on a Friday night. And thank you so much to all of our incredible, inspiring, wonderful speakers. I think I'm just going to rewatch this recording on a daily basis, maybe. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone being here and your support for the campaign as well. Please do share all of our materials online, tell your friends and family about it, help us raise awareness, and we appreciate it. And we have drinks, if you would like to stay for drinks. There are wine and soft drinks.
don't leave, we just want to take one photo of the meeting, if that's all right.
If you don't want to be in the photo, you're welcome to not be in the photo.
Put your head down or something. You have to look like you really